Sometimes the best interior design tips are finding out what not to do. Here are 9 design mistakes, because we couldn't think of 10. Knowing how to choose paint and the right paint colors has a lot to do with personal preference, but it's also important to consider some key factors and maybe some pitfalls that you can avoid before you spend that money on paint and painters. The process isn't as simple as picking your favorite color and just going with it, or carbon copying something you saw online, assuming it'll be just as awesome in your own space. I'm James from thepaintpeople.com with a freshly shaved face. Allow me to be your guide so I can navigate you away from these 9 paint color design mistakes that many people make, but you don't have to. The first one is starting your scheme too specifically. I always recommend being much more general to begin with. Before you even consider the color, what you need to first consider is the much broader big picture. What sort of energy or vibe do you want the space to portray? Do you want it to be an energizing and stimulating atmosphere? Or maybe something completely opposite, something that's maybe more calming or soothing. That one consideration will greatly impact the types of colors you're going to be looking at. It could cut your selection in half by going either warm or cool. If you're planning on decorating an office where you want to encourage productivity, then maybe that beautiful coastal blue color is not the perfect choice for that circumstance. The second mistake is being super trendy. Trends are always going to be temporary, and although it's usually fun to examine what's currently on trend and allow it to influence your design, it's not always recommended to just straight up change your entire design based on what's currently popular. In music and fashion, it's easier to switch things up and embrace the popular looks and sounds, but normally your interior design can be a pretty decent investment. So what I always recommend is try and base a larger portion of your design on the more timeless palettes that are less likely to go out of style in a couple of years. And then if you want to be a little bit trendy, you can always insert some fun accent pieces here and there that you can easily rotate in and out as you see fit. The third mistake I see people is picking colors in the paint store. Now, this one sounds a bit strange considering I spend a lot of my time at the paint store, obviously. But it's crucial to remember that a paint store's lighting is going to be completely different from your lighting at home. That massive wall of color chips is an awesome resource, but there's also a reason why you're able to physically take those color swatches home with you, because that's exactly what you should be doing. Even if your local paint store has one of those fancy schmancy light sliders that can adjust from cool to warm lighting, just bring the color chips home and then make your decision based on that. Or better yet, get a color tester and paint something like a mighty board to get an even better perception of the color. You can check out our video on mighty boards down below if you're curious. Mistake number 4 is picking a dark color. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with picking a dark color. In fact, in a lot of cases, going a bit darker can add the depth necessary for the overall look to feel complete. That being said, I will more often hear a customer complain about a color feeling too dark rather than too light. The problem with the color being too light is maybe the color won't be as noticeable or as prominent, but the issue of a color being too dark, on the other hand, will have a much more negative impact on the space because chances are it'll make whatever room it's in feel even smaller than it actually is. If you're wondering to yourself, is this color too dark? Odds are it might be. But still, test the color out, and if you're still in doubt, maybe go a little bit lighter just to be safe. Mistake number 5 is going too bright. Not bright as in light, I'm more so talking about the extremely saturated colors like bright vibrant reds and greens and blues, basically any color that is not muddied with brown or gray tones inside. There's a reason I always default to those dusty or muted colors, and the reason for that is oftentimes the undertones in those types of colors are going to be a lot more prominent than you might expect once it's painted on the wall. This is especially the case if you're used to those neutral color palettes, and then you try and throw something a little more bright and bold on the walls. More often than not, it may end up being a lot louder than you had anticipated. If you're new to dynamic bright colors, maybe consider some of those transitional toned down colors that still have some gray in them. Of course, if your goal is to have a color really stand out, especially in the form of an accent, then go for it. The other end of the spectrum is the mistake of going too safe and too neutral everywhere. I think I would rather have a color that's just way too much compared to just bland oatmeal off-white everywhere. At least the bright color has a bit of personality. There's nothing wrong with going with a neutral color palette. In fact, I see it all the time because you can stick with neutral colors and then just play with varying degrees of light and darker shades. In order to have some visual depth, you either want to play with contrast, texture, or color. If you have light gray floors and a light gray set of walls and a light gray couch, the space is going to feel really stale. A lot of people misconstrue the minimalist aesthetic with light neutrals, but you still want to change things up one way or another. But this doesn't just happen with neutrals, because mistake number 7 is going too matchy-matchy. I have nothing against monochromatic color schemes. In fact, some of them can look really cool, where you base your entire color palette off of one core color hue. But it's most successful when it's deliberately done rather than accidentally. You don't want to get caught in that trap where you have green curtains, so then you go out and buy a green area rug and some green linens, and then finish it off with some green paint. Believe it or not, I find monochromatic color palettes to be some of the trickier ones to pull off effectively because of how much you really have to change things up within that one color. Remember, if you're obsessed with a color and you want to go full monochromatic with it, then be sure to diversify your look with varying depths of color. Some lighter pastel greens here, some deeply shaded greens there, maybe some differing textures in the forms of your wall, maybe some velvet. The list goes on and on. The 8th mistake I see often is relying on white. From farmhouse designs to that art gallery aesthetic that seems to be fairly desirable, more and more people tend to assume that nothing beats white walls. I mean, sure, white walls look bright, vibrant, and clean at first. The problem with white is its upkeep. It's extremely difficult to keep walls perfectly clean over a long period of time, especially white. And also in certain lighting conditions, shadows can look more pronounced on white walls, which can diminish its intended effect. Also, there's so many types of white and off-whites you can use, and you would think that going with the brightest white is always the best option, but it's not. The problem with that is sometimes it's just way too overpowering and stark and sterile, and it just becomes an eyesore. Personally, sometimes white walls simply just look like they've been primed and the project hasn't been finished yet. This is not to discourage anyone with white walls in their home. In a lot of cases, it looks fantastic, but it's not the easy way out that a lot of people might think it is. And finally, the last mistake in regards to paint colors in interior design doesn't have a lot to do with color specifically, but it can greatly impact the look of your paint. And that's forgetting about the finish. Interior paints typically come in several different finishes. You got flat, matte, eggshell, pearl, satin, and semi-gloss. Here's our dedicated video on paint finishes if you want more detail on each of them, and maybe you want to know which one you should be getting for your project. Go ahead and do me a massive favor and bash that like button for me. That's it for this one. See you on the next one.